All right, we are on session 3, Exploring Education Models. And we wanted to start off by taking some time to give you an opportunity to ask any questions you might have from the previous sessions. Hopefully you've attended the sessions or watched the videos from the 2 previous sessions where we looked at the issues and challenges facing Christians with the state of education today. And then that was session 1. And session 2 we discussed the history of Lutheran education, which was a particularly Lutheran adaptation of the Christian heritage of classical education. So hopefully you've read and listened or watched some of those resources we shared with you. So do we have any questions that you've been wanting to ask? And Josh may jump in here too in answering some of these things as well, since he made some of the presentation.
Well, not a question per se, but could you just recap what you said at the end of the last session about why we moved away from the old way of education? Because I know we were a little bit in a hurry then, and I think I got most of it.
Yeah.
It had to do with cultural changes, but if you could just recap that.
Well, so I'll preface my answer to that question. What happened with Lutheran classical education? How did we go away from that model and that approach in the LCMS? And I'll just kind of preface what I'm saying there with I don't know of a definitive work that exists kind of laying out that history and all of the factors that contributed to that. Based on my own study of our history and things that I've read, I have a number of things that a number of theories, I guess. A number of things that would contribute maybe to an overall theory of where that went. It seems to be the case that the model of education changed at the same time when we moved from German to English. And what motivated the move from German to English, or what sped that up, I should say, maybe forced it more quickly than it might have happened naturally, was what were the 2 world wars and the anti-German sentiments prominent in the country, the desire among our German Lutherans to prove to themselves and everybody else that they were good American citizens. In some cases there was some persecution going on. And so a move to English happened rapidly. But also, and so maybe with that acculturation, that there is greater exposure in our Lutheran teachers and pastors to the modern education methods that were being used at the time. Some of the things that I've read some minutes of the Synod saying, they're going to do a big overhaul of the Synod's curriculum at this particular time to modernize and standardize and do various other things. I don't know what that means, but I'm assuming that that's a signal as to when some of these shifts happen. So that's the best that I can give you.
It doesn't seem like
I want Korchak to write part 2.
It didn't seem like that they would throw the baby out with the bathwater. Anglicizing something is one thing, but overhauling it is quite another.
I think though too, if you're moving from instruction in German and rapidly into English, what are you going to use for your textbooks? What are you going to use for all your resources, right? And it's easier to grab things that are already translated. I mean, you see this in sort of the evolution of the English hymnals as well. If you look at TLH, for example, there's a lot of Methodist hymns. And a lot of the hymns that we sing today are not in there because they hadn't been translated yet into English. And so you've got to put resources out there. You've got to put things together. And there are stuff that exists in English. And so there's going to be a temptation there to grab onto some of those things just to fill the space. So maybe they're taking up the English ground. And they were teaching, and Korchak does say, they were teaching them English as part of their instruction, but it was like a foreign language, you know? So, and it changes over time. So, I think those are just some of the things that contribute to that. Josh, you have anything to add there?
I think I would say too, it just, seeps in slowly over time, especially in the post-World War II environment where our big enemy is communism and everybody really wants to be an American and participate in American things like public school and all the other things that go along with that era of, proving your patriotism and proving your belief in one nation under God and all those things. So some of the distinctions sort of disappear slowly as well. I think that'd be another factor.
Any other questions from earlier sessions? Okay. All right. Well, then, if questions do come, feel free to email me or Josh, or pull us aside, or text, or whatever you want to do. We can work through that some more. Okay. So let's. What I want to talk about today is to discuss a number of models of education which are being employed by LCMS churches today. Now, I'm not talking about curricular models like classical versus modern. What I'm talking about is kind of, the structure of the school, how they are, how they conduct education, everything from the number of kids to so on and so forth. We'll look at all of that. And I think, and the reason I want to do this is because I think for a lot of people who've grown up in the LCMS, there are certain assumptions about what a Lutheran school is, okay? And those assumptions, usually involve, having in your mind something like a, pre-K or kindergarten through 8th grade, requiring lots of space for classrooms and a cafeteria, and maybe gym or field for sports or playgrounds or all kinds of different things that, characterize a lot of the larger parochial schools that many of us were familiar with growing up, even if we didn't attend one ourselves. Also the assumption that a school requires a lot of staff, principal and teachers and all these administrators. Also, the assumption that a school requires a large budget and also a very large expense on the part of families who are paying for their children's education. While that could eventually become our goal, to have that kind of a school, in the short term, that's a pretty intimidating idea, isn't it? Right? I mean, what are we going to do? Build a whole big facility and all these classrooms and hire all these teachers, and that's a big thing to consider. Yeah.
How much of that is dictated by governmental influences as well? And how much, so one of the things that we have to also consider with that is how much do we here on the state line in North Carolina have to be subject to the state's regulations of saying that you are a sanctioned private school within the state.
Yeah, so the question is about government regulations and how does the church fit in with that. The models that I'm going to discuss today, there would be ways of carrying out any of these models in our own state and in our own context. And if we were to pursue some of these models, there are also some organizations that exist that can help us navigate those waters if we wanted to go in that direction. So I wouldn't consider that a big hurdle or stumbling block regarding what we're considering at this point, at this stage. Obviously, if we were to go beyond this sort of conversational stage and start thinking about exactly what we would want to do, then we would really have to dial in and talk about those things. But I do think that there's a path for any of these models to navigate that. Yeah. All right, so again, I think, what we have is, with this sort of conception in many people's minds about what a Lutheran school is, this becomes a very intimidating idea. And what I want to do is to help us understand that there are other options beyond that concept. We're going to look at an example of a Lutheran school in that concept, but we're going to look at a number of others as well. Okay? So, we've already seen that in the history of the LCMS going back to its founding, nearly every Lutheran church operated a school. And most of those schools were small, one-room schoolhouse operations with the pastor and maybe another teacher working with the congregation to provide for the education of the children. So a Lutheran school doesn't have to be a big deal. It can be a very small kind of deal connected with the church. It doesn't have to be large. It doesn't have to be expensive or expansive in terms of space. All that might be required is the commitment of the pastor of the congregation, the church, and the parents who would be desiring to provide a faithful education for their children. So, with that being said, we're going to talk about what has been called the micro school movement. What is a micro school? General characteristics include that a micro school is, based on the name, smaller in size. That you're probably going to have multi-age classes. That is, I hate to say traditional because there's traditions preceding the quote traditional model in our minds, right? You have maybe 1 or 2 grades in a classroom together. This you may have, 4, 5, or 6 grades in a classroom together, depending, or all the grades together in a class. More personalized learning. So with a smaller size comes the ability to tailor the education to the child's needs a little bit more. Can be legal. Here's the legal. Can be legally structured as a private school or as a resource center for homeschool children. So I'll be sharing a few slides from a presentation that I attended, put on by Soaring Education Services. It's an RSO of the Missouri Synod that actually is a consulting group for congregations that want to start schools, and they specialize in micro schools. Some of this information is actually from their slides as well, and they're saying, yes, there are ways in just about any state to put these things together. The role of a teacher shifts oftentimes in the micro school and becomes a little bit more like a homeschool teacher. There's less creation and delivery of content and more focus on learning facilitation, guiding, mentoring, and along with that, especially with the older children, a lot more kind of self-directed learning, right? Not self-directed, but self-study, right? So it's directed by the teacher, but there's assignments that they're carrying on their own. They're not sitting there listening to lectures all day. They're reading material, writing papers, doing work, and that sort of thing. So it's a little bit more independent learning that happens oftentimes in these micro school models. Micro schools vary greatly in price, size, education philosophy, models, facility, and use of technology. So we have an emerging micro school movement in the LCMS. LCMS churches, in their desire to provide for the education of their children, are looking at a lot of these different models. So let's look at some examples of emerging micro school models that are being employed by LCMS churches around the country. So we have a chart here illustrating some of these models. And notice that the models that are further to the left are closer to homeschooling, and the models further to the right are closer to the the concept in our mind of the Lutheran parochial school, right? In fact, if you went off of the chart on this side, you're probably talking about a homeschooling family that is making their own curriculum decisions and simply doing homeschooling on their own on this side. And on that side, off of the chart, would be what we think of as the little bit older model of the Lutheran parochial school, K through 8, multi-classes, big campus, all of that, right? All of these micro school models are somewhere in between in that range, okay? So and I noticed that there are kind of a lot of options in there, and maybe some that you've never heard of or thought of. So let's discuss what these are. And honestly, as you take a look at some of what different churches are doing, a lot of these may be embracing more than one of these models. The great thing about a micro school is that you can really tailor it to the needs of your church and congregation. But these are some general categories that can kind of help us think about the different options that are available. So the first is what we call learning or parent pods. These are more or less informal associations of homeschool families that are working together, pooling their resources to educate their children. So what could this look like? Well, in this situation, usually the only service being offered by the church is making their building available for the homeschool families to use. Now perhaps if most of the families are members of the church, maybe the pastor is involved in offering some catechetical opportunities or chapel worship kind of opportunities. But this is a pretty, as far as the church is concerned, a pretty hands-off kind of model. The church is kind of being a host to a group of homeschool families who are working together in different ways to educate their children. Now so it's parent-led, low structure on the church's end. Families may gather for one or more days per week. Often it's a 1 day a week or 2 day a week kind of thing. And what often happens is that parents who have particular areas of expertise will teach certain classes or offer certain kinds of learning opportunities to the whole group or to part of that group. So that might be that or certain learning opportunities that are better with a larger group may be offered in that setting, right? So like public speaking opportunities, right? I mean, how do you have a public speaking class or practice public speaking in your homeschool family? I suppose if you're like, some friends of mine who had, 8 to 12 children, that might be a little easier. But even still, it's good to speak in front of other people who are not your family. And so those are the kinds of things that might be offered. Social activities, science projects, sports, plays, art, music, field trips, chapel, often the kinds of learning opportunities that are better with that larger group.
Yeah, I don't think anybody is here that the church, we did this at one point. Back when Pastor Schaff was here, there was a homeschool group that would come in occasionally and they would do their science dissections and stuff here for the day. So, and I mean, it's a little bit too like what we've been doing this year with Madness.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's, everybody kind of understand what a learning parent pod kind of would be? Okay. Then there are learning centers, or sometimes called resource centers. And this is where there are particular programs or services that are being offered by the church as a resource for homeschoolers, or could be even for students in public or private schools outside of church. So maybe one older model that we might be familiar with from some congregations is a church offering a sort of pay-for after-school program with tutors to help the kids with with homework, that may offer other kinds of learning opportunities, maybe catechesis that's outside of what they're receiving in the public school or their private school. That's kind of the idea. What we're seeing now with kind of newer models of learning centers is churches that are doing kind of virtual online homeschool together, okay? So there's one curriculum or multiple curriculums. There's tutors and then, who are on site, who are helping the kids who are pursuing their online curriculum. And then there's social or religious activities outside of the work that they're doing together in the same place, but it's their own tailored program, right? So parents, in this case, parents are still in charge of the schooling. The staff are only there to help and to mentor and to motivate and to foster community and maybe, make sure that the kids are meeting their goals that their parents set for that day, as far as what they're to accomplish, that sort of thing, right? So this is often would be a kind of a pay-for service that's offered by the church. Now, outside of the church, you have these things, and this is kind of a good example of one of these, is a Kipod. If you've never, you can check this out online. But they talk about here that you can choose your curriculum, whatever works for your kid. They 3rd through 12th grade. Then they choose a plan, how many days a week they want to have their child there at the learning center, and then they pay for the amount of time that they're there. They can kind of go in and out. But this is good. Can be a good option maybe for a situation where both parents are working full time. They want to homeschool their kids, but they can't be there all the time. Maybe they enroll them in a learning center where they have a place where they can go and pursue their homeschooling education, and maybe a few other activities that are being offered by the resource center or the learning center. Okay, so this is not a Christian group, but if you go to their website, you can kind of get a good flavor for what they've got going on there, and they have 10 to 12 students. They match them up with kind of similar students and groups and so forth. Okay, does that help you understand what a learning center or a resource center is? Any questions about that?
So, is that mostly like an online learning instruction type of deal?
The Kipod, it sounds like they want it to be a predominantly online curriculum. Now that's not true in every church situation. In some of the church situations, you may be pursuing a tangible, physical homeschooling curriculum, and it may be organized in a slightly different way. But yeah. All right, any other questions on learning centers or resource centers? So this is a church offering, the way that Jack Preuss, who's in charge of Soaring, he said, it's kind of like daycare for homeschoolers, right? Okay? Right? And the church is offering this as a resource, and it's a paid kind of thing, okay? Let's talk about homeschool co-ops, okay? These are homeschool parents that are working directly with the church to provide certain educational resources or programs, which are paid for. So you have, in this case, usually a partial curriculum that's being offered by the church, kind of with the coordination and input of the parents. It's a partial curriculum that's being offered by the church, and the homeschool families are getting together to pursue these aspects of curriculum, and then the rest of their education and learning is chosen and directed by their parents and conducted at home. So I had here, I pulled up here this example here of Trinity Lutheran Church in Denver, Colorado. They've got a homeschool co-op, and they talk about, they've got a whole list down here at the bottom of all of these, of their teachers, right? And they're mostly like parents and different people in there who have different skills and so forth. So they have let's see here, I put a list together of what they've got there. So what are they offering together in their homeschool co-op? They're getting together a few times a week, and this is what the kids are getting. Catechesis and chapel, theology and history from the pastors for all grades. They have a music program. There's a husband and wife team there that run a music program for the kids. They have a guy who teaches Latin, literature for grades 3 through 7, 2 teachers that teach phonics for the younger children, chemistry and physics for the high school kids, and personal finance for the high school kids. And so you see that there's these certain aspects, certain curricula in certain areas. They're either hiring an expert or calling on the expertise of one of the parents to teach specific classes in these areas, and then the rest of the curriculum is at home. Does that make sense? And at Trinity, their cost is less than $300 per student. So it can be done very affordably, depending on whether you're hiring a lot of these people or whether you've got the expertise within the congregation and so forth. Right?
Is
So,
that baby semester?
I cannot remember how often they meet per week.
I think it's 2 days.
2 days?
I think.
Yeah, I think that's right. So 2 days per week.
And was
They-
it cost like an annual cost?
That's an annual cost. Yeah.
And there's no curriculum costs to the church or?
Well-
Or
I'm sure the church is
music, whatever.
weighing in on some of that.
Right. So like I said, these can range in cost quite dramatically,
Right.
depending on the resources you have in your congregation and what you want to offer, right? So it was very clear that some of the people that were on their website were parents of the kids. And then like the music person was the organist and her husband, right? Who both had degrees in music and were leading the music program, right? And so, there's just a lot of different things going on there. And like I said, there's going to be a wide range of what that would look like from church to church. But the idea here is that you're getting together and you're, and the church is offering curriculum options in specific areas for the homeschool families. Any questions on homeschool co-ops? Okay. The next is the hybrid homeschool. Now, the hybrid homeschool is a situation where the students are legally homeschooled in their state. But there is a complete curriculum being offered by the church. Okay? So, whereas in the homeschool co-op, you have certain things that are being offered by the church, and the rest is up for the parents to lay out. The hybrid homeschool is we're all doing this same curriculum together. And some of that learning takes place on site, and some of that learning takes place at home, and that can vary. But we're all doing the same thing together as a group, as a homeschool school, right? That's why it's called a hybrid, because it's kind of got one foot in both realities. Okay, so that's pretty simple there. Any questions about the hybrid homeschool?
Is that what CC is basically? The class
No, CC's more like in the co-op
more like
range. It's a little closer to the hybrid when you get into the older ages, the older groups. But for K through 8, it's very much, there is this CC curriculum, and there's certain things that everybody's kind of doing or supposed to be doing together. And then there's the whole other aspect of what other curriculum aspects that the parents are pursuing at home with their kids.
Does the hybrid include music and physical ed, or is that?
Yeah, we can include it, whatever. it can include whatever
They agree.
the church and the parents who are working to put this thing together want to do, right? It can be anything. And that's, again, one of the advantages is that you can really tailor that kind of the needs of the church as well.
Me, I mean, this is only.
Although on the other side, homeschooling parents tend to be a kind of independent bunch,
What?
okay? So you know, it may or may not be easy to get a consensus among your homeschool families to all do the same thing. So that can be the challenge there. All right?
This is only my first year going through it with him, but I think I would prefer to do the more hybrid homeschool because I think the most daunting thing for me was trying to figure out what other curriculum to do. I know there's some stuff that I tried to do a little bit too early for him, but there are some things like reading and the writing and and trying to figure out all of that stuff that felt very daunting to try to figure out on my own. And I had lovely people to ask advice for.
Well,
It would be nice to have everybody on more of a consensus so you have some support with it, you know.
And that model can be very attractive, especially for the person or the parents who want to homeschool, and it's so intimidating to try to put this thing together themselves. There's a certain sense when they say, just tell me what to do,
Yeah.
right?
But I'm willing to do
Tell
it.
me what
but
to do.
Give it to me. Tell me what to do.
Yeah. So,
Well, I feel like it would be good too, like you were saying, for our other parents who want to do it, but they have to work full time. And so then you have more of a hybrid like this.
yeah, and again, you could have more or less time that's on site. And of course, that just involves more or less resources and expenditures from the church and all of that. So it's totally, all of these are totally customizable in whatever way you want, but these are just some general ideas of how these things are going. Okay. Finally is I keep advancing the slide. Finally is the small schools. So these would be a full-time private school that is intentionally small. The curriculum is provided by the school. It's overseen by the teacher or teachers. A small, highly personalized learning environment. Again, kind of think the one-room schoolhouse or maybe a 2- or 3-room schoolhouse. Teachers are probably spending more time guiding the younger students, and the older students are doing a little bit more work independently, right? And that's kind of how those play out. And again, fully customizable, lots of different options, depending on what you're doing, lots of different costs, and so forth there. Okay, but so any questions about the small school or about this kind of range from homeschooling to the full-blown parochial school that exists there as options for congregations to pursue? Now, one of the ones that sometimes I see happen is you might have the small school sort of paired with the homeschool co-op, and this is what I thought a homeschool hybrid was where you have the school and you have a certain number of the students that are participating full time, but then there are certain activities or certain parts of that curriculum where the homeschoolers in the church come in and participate with the rest of the school in some of those activities. So we're seeing that model too being pursued by some folks. So maybe all the homeschoolers come in for catechesis and chapel 2 days a week. Or maybe all the homeschoolers come in and they participate in the school play along with the other kids, or in the public speaking aspect, or whatever it might be. Again, fully customizable, lots of options, but the idea there being that some of the kids are full-time and some of the kids are homeschool students that are coming in for some of those activities and learning opportunities. That's one of the other kind of ways of hybriding and customizing a lot of these different options.
Do you see a lot of people doing customizing for the small schools, like changing and not having it be a full day of school? Maybe it's half days, maybe it is limited classrooms and still things like that? Or do you think that once you get to that end of the spectrum, it just snaps back to more of the public framework?
No, there's a lot of options. So one of the ones listed on your list, well, you'll get a list of resources here. Redeemer in Fort Wayne, the younger children only go up, are only at school till noon. And then they go home. So the younger kids, I think they have A, B, and then they have sessions 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. They don't do grades by age. They do it by mastery. So you move from one phase to another phase based on your competency at that phase. And so, which is kind of an interesting model, right? You don't have this pressure to push kids to the next grade to be with their age group. It's really tailored. But anyway, the younger grades don't stay as long. That's true with like CC too, as a homeschool co-op. So some of these other options. The Chi Pods, for example, that we looked at, they won't accept students before 3rd grade because that's not a conducive learning environment to teaching somebody to read. That's a much more hands-on activity. And so they want them to be able to read and be able to pursue their curriculum more independently, so they don't want them to come, before 3rd grade. Those are all options that are on the table there, and they're all customizable. Okay, so let me just run through a couple more things. So I wanted to share with you a couple slides from this presentation from Soaring Education that I attended online. Again, Soaring Education RSO Synod, consultant for churches wishing to start schools or micro schools. And this one is showing the changing enrollment trends in education since COVID. Public school involvement is 15% down. Charter schools are 36% up. School choice, vouchers, school enrollment, 25% up. Private schools, 22% up. Micro school, 50% up. And homeschooling, 144% up. So just showing you all that a lot of people are beginning to think about this and are interested in other options outside of the public school. Any questions about that slide? And then this one from from Soaring, which was talking about why are micro schools growing. A big part of that is market demand, both before and now accelerating in the post-COVID world. People are demanding more private and or faith-based education opportunities. The easier use of emerging tools, technology, new forms of curriculum and content, school choice, public funding. I mean, there's, think about all I think about when my mom was homeschooling me, right, in the 80s and 90s, and there wasn't a whole lot of homeschool curriculums available and options and models, and now there's just so many things to choose from, which make it easier for a church to pursue one of these options that we've been discussing. Flexibility in teacher requirements. It's hard to maintain a whole staff of teachers. If you talk to my sister, who's the principal of a school, a full-blown, traditional, right, Lutheran parochial school, and that's a challenge to keep enough teachers on staff and so forth. Less startup costs and less risk to starting. So that's another big one. This is an option that isn't going to break the bank right away, and if it doesn't work out, it's not that you've built, a huge facility now that you've got to pay off, right? If it doesn't work out.
Well, especially if we decide and we're only in the beginning, maybe you're completely just do our own people, or if we're going to open it up for other
All
people.
of those options would be on the table if
Yeah.
we want to pursue something. Then we have to have all those conversations.
Yeah.
How big do we want this to be? Do we want to have kids from outside the church or only the kids inside the church? All of those questions would have to be addressed only if we decide after this process that we want to try to look into doing something. Lower cost to families. These are a lot more affordable than a lot of traditional parochial school options. So it's easier for families to you know, bite the bullet and pay a lot less, usually, to get them involved. Less geographic boundaries. You know, a lot of times you had to be worried about your market and whether you're going to have enough people in your market to sustain a school. Well, with the micro school option, I mean, there's churches out there with 5 kids or 10 kids. They're providing those kids a great education without having to worry about whether they're in a good enough market. And then COVID-friendly, he puts in there, but better ability for parents to choose curriculum and program that aligns with their family values and or faith. You know, what we've seen post-COVID, of course, is, you know, all of the controversies surrounding the public schools and the lack of listening to parents that is occurring there. The parents are not having a say in their child's education. With all of these models, parents have a lot more involvement and say as they work together to pursue whatever model might be offered. Okay?
Well, that being said, also, we get kids from outside the church, then those parents want their say.
Yep.
And then you have to battle sometimes.
Right. So if we wanted to pursue an option, that's a big question that we would have to ask ourselves, right? And well, as we look at some of the models that we're going to share with you here in a minute, some examples, you'll see that different schools have different policies about who can participate and who can't. So I know that Redeemer in Fort Wayne, which I mentioned before, they only accept students who are from their own church or from another congregation of the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. Period. That's it. But of course, that's in Fort Wayne, where, you know, you can stand in the footsteps of Redeemer and see the spires of 6 other LCMS churches, right? So, you know, again, situations are always different and different. So, any other questions about micro school growth and anything else there? All right, so what we're going to do here is Josh is going to take over. He's got some handouts for you, and we're just going to look at some snapshots of some schools, actual LCMS schools, that are pursuing some of these models that we've just discussed. Just so that you can kind of get a sense or a feel for what something like this might look like, boots on the ground. All right? So, I'll pass these out.
Okay, so Pastor and I have made a lot of contacts to schools, and you know, through the years, obviously, have met people at conferences and whatnot that are doing different things. I know many of you as well know people across the Synod or have been at churches that have had schools or went to a parochial school and so forth. But we tried to find some snapshots of schools that are in this range that Pastor was talking about, right? So at the top of the handout here, you see the graphic that Pastor was using, so you have that for reference, okay? And we're going to talk about a few examples that are in that range, okay? Pastor already mentioned Trinity Lutheran in Denver, Colorado, okay, which is considered a homeschool co-op. And they meet 2 days a week, as we said, and they provide catechesis, theology, music, and so forth on their church property. As we said, it's about $300 tuition per year per student. They don't provide all of the curriculum, right? It's just specific things that that church and their experts can provide for their students. Do you know if that's church members only there, Pastor, at Trinity?
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know.
Okay. And then we're going to look more in depth at 3 others: Orchard Classical, Scarville Lutheran, and Emmanuel Lutheran, which would be considered a hybrid homeschool, a small school, and a large school. So let's go through those, and please ask any questions you have as we're going along. So a snapshot of a hybrid homeschool. Orchard Classical Community is in Northern Virginia, and this was founded by Anna Martin, who is currently the executive director of CCLE, which is the Consortium of Classical Lutheran Education. This is an organization that networks and provides resources for classical schools. They put on a large conference every year. They put out a Classical Lutheran Education journal. It is an exploding organization, CCLE. And for example, this year, their conference this summer is going to be at Concordia, Nebraska, and they've maxed out at 450. The Concordians can't take any more for meals. So who knows how many would have come. So 450 people from around the country are going to go talk about classical education this summer at Concordia, Nebraska. Pastors, teachers, and so forth. So that's what CCLE is. Anna Martin's the executive director of that group now. But when she was in Northern Virginia, she founded a homeschool co-op when her oldest child was in 2nd grade. They started with elementary grades, okay? So they got a group of 15 families together, and they found a facility. They put together a curriculum, and they started, okay? And it started out as 1 day per week, where the families would come together, and they would have tutors, which started out primarily as moms, okay? She called them tutor moms. And at the elementary level, that was sort of the model they used. But as families got interested and as, you know, the younger kids got older, they just organically grew from that elementary model of a 1 day a week up to a full K through 12, 2 day a week system with over 100 kids, okay? And the costs for this program in their current form, tuition at the high school level for this model is $3,000 to $4,000, and then middle is around $2,000, and then elementary was a little less than that. And that's in large part because the funds they need to pay the teachers, right? At the lower levels, it's primarily tutor moms. At the upper levels, they use what they call a content expert model, where they hire people who are experts in the fields, right? As anybody who knows anything about homeschooling, it gets harder the older your kids get, right? To be an expert in everything. And so they've solved that by hiring content experts. And in Northern Virginia, if you want a content expert about anything, you can pay them, and they'll come. So they hired, you know, a physics guy, and a chemistry guy, and a literature lady, and all of the people that had advanced degrees in those fields. Some of them would have been church members, some of them would have been at universities, and they hired them to teach the kids in their realm of expertise, okay? And they provided professional development for them so that they made sure that they were doing so in accord with the model they were using, which was a classical model, okay? So that's how they approached it. The facilities they found, one of the families actually went to the Purcellville Baptist Church, and so they were able to get that rent-free. And it's a huge facility, lots of classrooms, gym, playground. They had a lot of land and so forth. As I said, enrollment-wise, currently over 100 kids. It is K through 12, but over a decade ago, it started out just with 15 families. As far as admissions process, this is a, you might say, small O Orthodox group. They take, you know, people from a wide variety of denominations. There is a pretty rigorous admissions process about what this group does, what the classical model is, what their commitments are. So they do have a pretty high retention. But she did mention in my conversations with Anna that it gets challenging in the upper grades when it comes to theology. Right? You've got everybody from Pentecostals to Charismatics and everybody in between, right? So as you get into the upper levels, that would be a challenge for sure. So she did mention that in their setting. A few other things, if we flip the page, about Orchard Classical. I think I already talked about staffing, right? The lower levels, they use the sort of the tutor approach. But then at the upper levels, they hire content experts, and they pay them as contract workers. Okay? And in Northern Virginia, like I said, they've been able to find a lot of great experts from churches, relevant professional fields, and local universities. And like I said, they provide professional development for them so that they know what they're looking for and what model they're using. So as far as their curriculum that they use, they've really created a mix that works for them. And this is true at almost any school, especially these smaller schools that are much more customizable. You're really creating an eclectic mix, a potpourri of different curricular choices that work for you. So they're using a mixture of things like Memoria Press, Claritus Grammar, Saxon Math, and so forth. And then in the upper levels, it's really not textbook driven at all. It's primary source driven, right, which is a keystone of classical education, that you're engaging with the texts themselves, not a secondary or tertiary source primarily, right? And if you have a content expert, they don't need a textbook anyway, right? They can direct you to the primary source and engage with those, make those interesting, tell the stories and all the rest in a way that's going to be better than the textbook, right? So that's their model at the upper level. So they have elementary, middle, and high school. Elementary is divided roughly by age, but they do really go more on a competency model, right? Where if the student is ready, if they've shown expertise in an area, they advance on, right? So it's not some magical, being, advanced to the next level just because you're a year older. It's based on your competency. They try to keep a roughly 50-50 male-female ratio in the classrooms. And then, as I said, at the lower level, mostly was a tutor model. Middle school, they divided out male-female, which a lot of schools have done historically. And actually, there's some good recent data on that. Some public schools have even returned to that in middle school years because it's just such a tumultuous time, right, as far as adolescence and all the rest. So they used, single-sex classes in middle school. Here you had some tutors used and then some content experts. And then high school, they returned to co-ed. They found that worked well for them. At the high school level, there was some one-room schoolhouse where all 4 years of high school were in the same room. For example, fine arts and literature, they tried to do in that way, where there wasn't certain prerequisites that were needed, right? And then they used, like I said, the content expert model for the teaching side. As far as the budget and the relationship to a church or how they were governed, Orchard Classical is a 501c3 with no specific connection to any one church. Okay, and that's just because how they formed, right? They didn't form in relation to a specific church. It was a group of families that got together and said, hey, let's do this thing. Okay, and so they've remained a 501c3 throughout their years. Okay, did you have your hand up, Kitty? Yeah.
Could you give me an example of what a primary source is?
Sure. So if we're doing American history, I would want to have my students read the Declaration of Independence and not just read a textbook talking about the Declaration of Independence, right? So maybe in math as well, right? So if I want to talk about geometry, we'd want to do the Pythagorean theorem, but maybe we'd want to also read some of Pythagoras, right? Some of his writings, or Euclid's geometry. Isaac Newton, right? We're going to learn Newton's laws. Let's read Newton's Principia, right? Some of the actual things that were written by the people that were living during the time that were the ones that the textbooks are based on. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
For the primary teachers that they brought in, did they give them any sort of specifics on like a lesson plan or anything? Because not all experts are good-born teachers. So I'm just wondering, like, how did she give you any information on how?
We didn't drill down that far,
I was just curious.
but she did mention that professional development was a central part of making this model work. That she really formed a team that had buy-in and all the rest. Yeah, no, that's a good point. Just because you have your PhD in physics doesn't mean you're going to necessarily be a good teacher.
Yeah, well, like the community college I went to, I think the rule was that as long as you had a degree in that subject, you could teach, but there was no requirement for teaching skills being taught to that person. And so you could definitely tell the differences. So I was just curious.
Yep, no, that's good. It's good. Other questions about Orchard? Yeah.
So understanding that we're working on a spectrum here and not necessarily bright lines, but is kind of the primary difference between this and what Pastor was describing about Trinity being that they are providing the curriculum like for
Correct.
all 5 days, even though they're only meeting for
Correct.
2?
This is the whole curriculum. Yep.
So this is the hybrid homeschool versus the co-op homeschool.
Right.
It started as more of a co-op and then morphed into
It did.
a more
It grew into it,
all-encompassing.
especially with the hiring of the faculty.
Right.
The forming of the faculty, the defining of the whole curriculum. Yeah. Yep. Good question. Other questions? Okay, so let's take a look at now what we'd call a small school, Scarville Lutheran School. This is a one-room schoolhouse model, okay, that was started in 1927 and has existed for the most part since then. There was a brief hiatus where they closed due to lack of children in the 40s into the 50s. But since 1958, it has been in operation. They got pretty close to closing about a decade ago. They were down to 5 students. But they decided to keep the school open, and it's at 24 students now. It looks like 27 for next year. So according to our diagram, this would be a small school, a micro school. They offer K through 8, mostly in one room. And though the older students, they do start to break out a little bit into different parts of the church for certain classes in the upper grades. They also started a high school 4 years ago. Their high school currently has 6 students, with 2 graduating this year. So now they're actually K through 12. Okay? And this is a good example of what Pastor was saying, that you can do these types of schools anywhere, right? This is in Scarville, which is a town of 75 people in rural Iowa, with a congregation of about 140 members. Right? Cost for families: students who are members of the church don't pay any tuition. This is really a mission of the church. Non-member families pay about $3,500 per year, and then an additional $1,000 for additional students from each family. The church budget and the school budget are together, and the expenses in 2022 were $95,000. As far as their space and facilities, they meet in the church basement, other areas of the church as they need to break out in the older grades. They did add to their church a dedicated school building around the year 2000 to facilitate things more easily. They do have a library at the church, a narthex and so forth, and other areas where they break out when they need to. And he did talk about the fact that they're going to be adding on as well to facilitate some of that in the coming years. So as far as enrollment, like I said, 24 students this year, 27 next year. It is currently K through 12. They group grades together as much as possible. Obviously, in a one-room model, that's what you're doing, based on the strengths and weakness of individual students. They have chapel every day. All grades eat together at lunch, and they also do recitations together at lunch, as part of practicing public speaking and practicing their daily work and so forth. As far as the missions process goes, it is primarily for the members of the church. This school is, right? That's what they're seeing it as. It's not an outreach or something like that. It is primarily for the members of the church. They do allow non-members to come, but they require that they first come to a day of school to see what the day is like. They have an interview process with the kids and the family, so it's a pretty rigorous process to get in to make sure that they know what they're signing up for. Staffing, they have one full-time teacher who I think was trained at one of the Concordias, or maybe Bethany Lutheran, I think, actually. And then they have 7 part-time teachers that might teach a certain area for the upper levels, right? Or might come in on a certain day to help in class, right? So they have, a lot of those are parents. And then they have 2 aides that help, especially in the lower grades, with literacy. As far as their curriculum, they've also created sort of an eclectic mix. They use a variety of things there that I've listed to design something that works best for them. And then also they mentioned that, especially in the older levels, we're wanting them to read the primary sources or the classic works themselves, and not just the secondary stuff. The way they organize their school, as we said, it is one organization with the church. The voters have the authority over the school. They elect the school board. The school board oversees the operation of the school. The school board consists of 3 people that are on sort of a rotating series of terms. As far as expenses for the school, things less than $2,500 per semester, that's considered discretionary spending, but needs over $2,500, they have to get direct approval from the voters' assembly. So that's a little bit about Scarville Lutheran School, a one-room schoolhouse. Yeah, Dave?
I just have one question. I fail to see how you can teach numerous grades in one classroom. I mean, if you're teaching math, you're going to teach some kids how to add 2 plus 2, and some of them angles, and some of them quadratic equations. How does that work?
Yeah, it's definitely different than the way we think of, a graded approach in public schools. But what you're doing really is you're focusing on a small group at a time, right? While the others are doing independent work, right? So the teacher is floating around to the room. Sometimes you might have the older kids help the younger kids. Maybe some of you who have been in that environment can describe what it exactly looks like. But basically, it's not direct instruction, me directing to everybody at once, right?
Okay.
It's more of sort of moving around and kids helping one another, right?
Well, I think for those, talk to some of the homeschool parents, because it's the same situation, in a lot of our homes where we've got multiple ages and multiple grades and multiple abilities. And, in my experience, and I'm sure this is true for the rest of you too, it's particularly the littles, as they're learning to read, that require a lot more hands-on, directed attention. But once they're able to read, there's a way in which they could read the assignment, read something that's going to teach them the concept, pursue independent work in a lot of areas, and then the teacher comes in and checks their work and answers questions or helps them with their stuff and that sort of thing. I found that to be the case with my own children, that once they got to a certain age, most of their work, Kaylin, for example, could, she's pretty much taught herself everything using the curriculum for the last, 6-7 years. And Alicia's just been there to check on her and make sure she's meeting her goals and answering questions when she gets stuck and that sort of thing. And so in the one-room schoolhouse, that's often, I think, the model that's being used. And it actually, so I was homeschooled, and one of the beauties of pursuing that model is that kids learn how to learn on their own. And that helped me thrive a lot more in college. Because once you get to college, nobody's going to hold your hand the whole time. And you've got to know how to read a book, understand the material, write a paper about it, or whatever it might be. That's how the rest of your life of learning is. And so I think it's a very doable model, both in the homeschool environment or in the small school environment.
I taught a whole bunch of different things, private, public school stuff. And we had the same thing even in public school, where I had my Down syndrome children in with my GT kids. And so I had to go figure out what is my Down syndrome child going to be able to handle. They kind of float around. On Whitmer Academy right now, they have 1 hour of online. And so the Latin teacher starts with Latin 1, elementary Latin actually, does something with them.
Elementary Latin and Latin 1 at the same time.
And then Latin 2, Latin 3, Latin, rolls right through for that hour.
Yep.
And then everybody kind of.
And so you're also reviewing, right? The older kids are reviewing as they're going.
And then the kids are listening and
Right.
picking up on things.
So it's pushing the younger kids, it's helping the older kids to realize that they should help the younger kids, and that they're overlearning that original material. There's certainly trade-offs, right? It can be challenging, right?
Yeah, the teacher's
But
gotta
yeah,
be-
any model has trade-offs for sure, right? And so that would certainly be, a trade-off to consider. Yep. Yeah, good questions. Anything else? Okay, so let's also take a snapshot of a large school, Emmanuel Lutheran School. This is in Alexandria, Virginia. This is one that is, I think, in my opinion, one of the sort of models for the synod of a classical school that's doing sort of a full-fledged 5-day-a-week K-8 school. So this is a school that also has a long history, started in 1870. They closed briefly before World War I, and they opened in 1945 as World War II was coming to a close. And it's continued in existence since then. In the last few decades, they've really formed a strong Lutheran identity and also classical identity in Northern Virginia. And like I said, it is K-8. This is a full-fledged school, 5 days a week, all the facilities, all the things you think of with a traditional school. Christy and I actually had a chance to visit there in February and speak with the headmaster who we had met at a conference the prior summer. She gave us a whole tour and all the rest. It is an impressive facility. It is $10,000 a year. But in that area, Northern Virginia, DC suburbs, that's actually about half of what most private schools cost there in that area. They also offer lots of tuition assistance to students. Julia mentioned that they gave over $100,000 in tuition assistance to students last year alone. So it is housed on church grounds. The school is a two-story building with several classrooms, and that is part of an expansion they did in the past 5 years, which was a multi-million-dollar building project that they finished up, and it's really, like I said, really impressive. They have 200 students currently, K through 8. It is primarily directed to church members, but they also accept non-members. There's different tuition rates for each. They also have a pretty robust admissions process. They have a series of interviews with the headmaster where they talk about the classical model. They also talk about the centrality of Lutheranism to the model. Right? They go through some core Lutheran doctrine with the potential families to make sure that they know that this is part of what we do every day. And then if we turn to the back, staffing-wise, they have roughly, it fluctuates between 10 or 15 teachers. Some are, fulfilling multiple roles at the school. Some are part-time. They have one full-time headmaster, and then the headmaster also has an assistant now that they brought on who does like part-time administrative stuff and part-time teaching. They also have combined curriculums to design something that works best for them. They have everything from the subjects we normally think of to logic and Latin and music and art and so forth. They break their school into two parts, what they call a lower school and an upper school, which really would be, thinking of elementary and middle. The grammar school is the lower school where you're really developing those skills that we talked about in our last meeting in sort of the grammar stage, right? You're learning all the math facts, you're learning all the basics, the 3 R's, of which one really is only an R, reading, writing, and arithmetic. And then as you work your way into the upper school, that's where things really get deeper into debating and logic and rhetoric and so forth. Most of the classes are a grade per class. They have enough resources and facilities to do that, although there are a few classes, depending on how many students that year will be in that grade, sometimes they combine into 2 grades in one class, depending on their teachers, that they have and how many students are in that class. At the upper level, I just thought this was fun. They break the school into houses. So you're sort of part of a school within a school, right, that has an identity. You create a logo and, a saying, a quotation, and so forth. Sort of like Harry Potter, right, with Gryffindor and all the rest. As far as their relationship to the church, they are connected to the church as a mission of Emmanuel Lutheran Church. Their school budget last year was $2.5 million for staff and school expenses. It is a single institution in conjunction with the church. Like I said, they have a school board that is comprised of members of the church that are elected by the congregation on rotating 2-year terms. The board is responsible for the governance of the school, the development of school policies, procedures, all those types of things. And then the headmaster is responsible for the daily operations of the school. So there's a little snapshot of Emmanuel. What we think of as sort of a large school. Questions, thoughts, comments on that one?
I think we included that one just to give you all a flavor of what a classical school of that size would look like.
Yeah. Yeah, this is not something that would be possible or likely anytime soon, right? This would be after a series of other things that would have to go right and all the rest, right? And if you wanted to even pursue anything, right? So there's no hidden agenda here or anything. It's just, I think it's important to show what can be done, and done well, right? Yeah.
They do a lot of fundraising.
Huge amount of fundraising, yes. Julia Habrick, the headmaster, that's sort of her wheelhouse is fundraising. Yeah, they do massive auctions each year. They really do a lot.
They're also in a very wealthy
They are. In
part
a
of the
very
country.
wealthy part of the country.
They've got a lot of very wealthy and high-powered
Yep.
members, DC types,
Yep, right on the outskirts of DC,
Yeah.
right? So they've got all sorts of things that come along with that. Yep. Any other questions on Emmanuel? Okay, then also there's a list of others. If you'd like to spend some time reading up more on these, I wanted to provide you with the links and so forth. We contacted other schools, we all know other people, and so, we weren't able to compile all those. We wanted to just give you like a few examples, right? Not to overwhelm you too much, but Trinity Lutheran is out in Cheyenne, Wyoming. That's a full K-8 school, approximately $5,000 in tuition. Roy and Gwen's son, Will Cloninger, is a teacher there, okay? So our church has a personal connection to that one. Faith Lutheran School in Plano, Texas. This is another sort of flagship classical school in the Synod right now. It's full K-12, approximately $11,000 tuition. Redeemer Classical, which Pastor mentioned, in Fort Wayne. This is a small private school, or classical school. How many students would you say they have now?
I think they said 30.
About 30.
They're fairly new, they've only been running for a few years. And he said that they started with 5 students and 1 teacher, and, and I think it's been 4 or 5 years that they've been in operation. They've gotten up to 30 now.
Yep. And they're adding grades as they go, right? Yep. And then Emmanuel Lutheran School in Mayville, Wisconsin. That's, another one-room schoolhouse, approximately $500 tuition per year. All Saints Lutheran, Jonesboro, Arkansas. It's a K-8 school, $6,000 tuition. St. Paul Lutheran School in Hamel, Illinois. That's another pretty well-known one across the Synod. That's a K-8 school. And then the co-op pastor mentioned, Trinity Lutheran. There's the website there if you want to find out more about that. And then Wittenberg Academy, another important model that's emerged in the last. How old is Wittenberg?
I think
2
it's
decades?
about 10 years.
10 years?
It's
10 years. Okay.
pretty old out.
So this is another way that people have creatively solved the education question, right? This is an online classical school. K-12 is offered. And I'd call this a university model because you don't have to take your whole curriculum through Wittenberg. So this is another model, too, that's emerged. A university model school, right? Where you pick what classes your student takes based on what needs you have, right? And there's a couple of these in the area, too. Lake Point Academy and Lake Wiley is a university model. Greyfriars in Charlotte is a university model, right? So that's another resource too that people have utilized as well. And it's $500 per credit. I looked on the website, I think, for high schoolers. Now, is one class a credit? Okay, so basically $500 per class.
One term.
One term.
Some of the classes go over 2 terms.
So if you were taking like Latin, that's $500 for one.
And they've been able to offer like a 20% discount if you do early enrollment for the last 3 years.
Okay. All right. And then also on there I put the CCLE, the Consortium of Classical Lutheran Education. If you'd like to read, they have all sorts of resources about these types of things we've been talking about. So there's a few snapshots for you to hopefully give you a better idea of how this can work and how it's been done and how it's being done as we really start to think about what, if anything, we want to do here, right? I appreciate all your energy and attention the last 3 meetings. I know it's been a lot of material, right? But I think what we've tried to do is just give everybody the same foundation and starting point so that now that we get to the point where, okay, what are we actually going to do here? At least we have a common language to talk, right? And to have a basis. Because I think really the exciting part would come maybe next. So what's next then?
All right, so where do we go from here? How do we proceed? I guess the first thing is I want to ask for any ask if there are anything if there's anything that we have not covered that you would like us to cover before we would get to the stage where we're kind of asking ourselves the question: do we want to look into one or more of these models, intending to pursue something? Right? This stage right now is just to kind of give us a sense of what is out there, what the possibilities are, what we could do. The next stage is really then to ask, do we want to do something? Okay. And then if the answer is yes, we have enough interest and buy-in from the congregation to say we want to pursue a school of some kind, then the following step would be, okay, let's get together and build this thing. Right? Decide exactly what model we want to pursue, and where we want to go from there. So right now, I'm just asking, do you have enough information for you to, what we want to do is do a survey, for you to fill out and answer a survey that would kind of give us a sense of whether or not we want to go beyond just this first kind of informational stage. Jane?
Just one thing about Wittenberg, the university model doesn't actually really start until grade 6. Until then, it's more so, this is a list of stuff, here is all the resources you need, and a week-by-week model of the school year.
Good, yeah. Okay. So, our intent next is to do a survey and kind of gauge where we're at. But would everybody in this room, do you think that we're ready for that, or is there more information you want or need, or things that you would like us to cover before we get to that point?
Do we need to have some kind of an idea on the parent skill, ability, education to know how far we could use teacher tutors?
I think that would be
Parent tutors, tutor
I think that would be
moms,
part of the next stage. If the decision at this point is, yes, we're very interested in pursuing some kind of educational opportunity offered by our church, if we want to move forward with that, then all of those other conversations would have to be had about models and skill sets and things that resources we have here. I mean, I can think of a lot of resources and skilled people that we have in our congregation who could contribute to something like that, but, yeah.
I have two questions, and I don't know if you've got the answer now, great, and if it's,
Sure.
go back and research and come back, great. One, when we first started discussing this in council, you mentioned that you thought Messiah was also looking at education options in their congregation. Do we have an idea of what their discussions have been and if anything has developed there?
I talked with one of their pastors last week.
Oh, okay. So you may have a...
I may have more recent.
I talked to one of their pastors last week too,
Okay,
so
go ahead.
so go ahead, Josh. Go ahead, Josh.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
So my understanding is that they're still in kind of the building planning phase. It looks like they are going to pursue a school. It looks like it's probably going to be a full-time small school kind of idea, and it looks like they're going to use a predominantly online curriculum. It's not going to be a classical school. It's probably going to be more of an online together kind of opportunity there. Did he say anything else?
Yeah.
There's some facility expansions that they're planning. Other
He
things.
said it depends on if they have enough kids sign
Yeah.
up, when really they could hit go or not. But,
They are working with that group I mentioned, Soaring Educational Services, to consult with them to help them build their school.
Okay, my second question was, have there been discussions, have you thought through how any of this would fit into the next 4 to 6 years for Josh, since he's obviously a strong resource for us in this area? If he's willing, what he's willing to do, how that would fit into his education, all of that.
Yeah, well, I have some thoughts, but maybe we'll let Josh answer that first. So yes, we have Josh, we have a great resource there, obviously. And I think if we were to pursue an education option, I think we would be stupid if we didn't make use of that resource. We're training him for pastoral ministry. I could foresee him as headmaster of a school. Many of our LCMS school headmasters are ordained pastors who also serve the life of the congregation as well, especially if you're pursuing a small school model. You know, there can be sort of a sharing of both, you know, congregational ministry and school ministry that's involved in that. So, and I think, I don't think I'm speaking out of place to say that Josh would be open to any and all of those possibilities if we were to pursue one or more of these models. Yeah? No?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, it's in
I
the
mean, this is honestly, this is one of the reasons why I think, you know, this is a good time for us to talk about this, because we actually have somebody here who could really be of service in helping guide us on that path. You know, classical education is a newer thing for our family. What we've been doing in homeschooling. Josh is an expert in all of that as well, and yeah.
Well, we have a whole group of experts. I mean, we have a group of families and individuals that we're gonna, if a church is gonna be successful doing something like this, it would be some church like ours. But so, I mean, if something comes out of all this, and that's a role for me and my vicarage, that's wonderful. But that's not the agenda or something like that. But I'd be certainly willing and open to do that if that's what materializes.
And we said that. I think we've said that all along. That you know, while either way, we can use help with general ministry concerns in the congregation, and Josh is going to be a great resource for that. We knew we were going to have this conversation as well, and that's part of the consideration, but Josh has skills and gifts and talents that can help us in that area too, if we go further than this conversation. All right, so the next step then is going to be that we're going to develop a survey. We want the survey. The survey would not be a commitment to pursue a particular model. It is a survey to gauge interest a little deeper and what kind of commitment we could expect from parents and church in taking this next step. So if we take the survey and there's not a lot of interest and people are, you know, say this is not something we're interested in, then the conversation ends here. If we take this survey and it seems like there's a lot of interest in going farther, then that initiates the next phase of our discussion. So part of that is going to be, we'll probably have in the survey some of these different models that we've discussed and opportunities in some way maybe for you to rank the level of interest you have in one model or another, those kinds of things, just so that we can get a flavor of what you're thinking and what the congregation is thinking at large. So maybe we can ask, and Josh can take some notes there. I don't have a pencil with me, but if you have any thoughts on what should or should not be included on the survey, or if there's anybody in this room who would like to help us put together this survey so that we can make sure that we capture the thoughts and will and intention of our congregation, we'd love to have that help. So, any thoughts or ideas as far as how we conduct the survey, what we should make sure that we include on there?
So one of the things that I would advise any survey to do would not necessarily be same large school, small school, either, not that particular, but to dive into the different features that of those, because we're likely to pick some kind of cafeteria approach ourselves. So,
because I think there's, you know, families that would be more interested in a school that's 5-day versus a 1-day. So just to
yeah, I think it's a good
have
point.
that.
So Yeah,
Checklist of
Well, you know, take your 5-point Likert scale and you
Yeah.
do each particular thing.
good. So
And
some of the issues that people are gonna probably be factors are gonna be costs,
This is also me volunteering to help write that survey.
okay? Costs
Put that
and
down, put that down.
number of days a week, and, you know, are you willing to, do you want it to be full-time, or are you willing to do a homeschool, partial homeschool kind of idea? All of those kinds of things would need to be on that survey, so we can kind of get a sense of where people are at, what they're open to pursuing.
Like just a general, if you're a congregation member, would you be willing to support this through the budget?
Financially, yeah.
And then if you are a parent, particularly.
Yeah, I think there's probably gonna be a separate section, there'll be a general section for everybody, and then probably for parents or soon-to-be parents or expecting to be parents at some point in the near future. What are you interested in particularly? Because we need the support of the whole congregation. We want the buy-in of the whole congregation if we're gonna go forward. But there's no point in doing anything if we don't have the parents and families who wanna put their children in that school.
So you're gonna do a survey that covers the whole congregation?
What good's this school with no students?
That's right. That's right.
I guess my biggest concern is that, because everybody, I know you've gone through 3 classes here, but, you know, the greater congregation, do they understand the absolute black and whiteness of classical education or Christian education versus public education? Public education with zero involvement of the parents, dumbing down of students, teaching of just, you know, this whole transgenderism thing and all that, and I mean, it's so black and white, but if people aren't paying attention to the news or aren't watching anything, and there's a lot of people like that, and it's not necessarily a bad thing, but they just don't, so, I mean, to suggest that we don't do anything because it's too expensive or something, well, it's such an important, it's so black and white, it's not like it's gray, and it's sort of okay if you do one or the other.
Well, I think, you know, we're making a lot of efforts to try to talk about those sorts of things. And, you know, session 1 really delved into that quite a bit. We made the videos available to the congregation. We're strongly encouraging everybody to watch those. We will again say, hey, look at, you know, we ask you before you fill out the survey, go back and watch those videos if you didn't get a chance to attend the meetings or whatever it might be. So we are, you know, we're trying to talk about that. I think one of the things that's in my mind as we talk about this is the fact that we do already have a lot of homeschoolers. Some of them may or may not be open to or want to do anything different from what they're already doing. Okay? That, you know, right? So there's that reality. There's probably others who are not yet quite at that stage, who may be, since we don't have another option currently, planning on homeschooling. There are some in our congregation who I know right now look at homeschooling as just totally impossible given their life situations or totally intimidating to them, and who would, you know, maybe only be open to a full-time school. And so there's a lot of different needs, a lot of different concerns, a lot of different ways in which the parents are trying to educate their children, and getting everybody enough on the same page to pursue a particular option together. That may be one of the challenges that we have. So.
Everything a large study group for individual homeschoolers would prove quite useful to all the homeschoolers. I speak from my own point of view, of course, but having the advice of other homeschoolers while doing your work and just general camaraderie would be quite a good thing.
Yeah. Yeah, so there, you know, might be, again, maybe it's that model where you've got some full-timers and some part-timers, you know. I don't know. I mean, I don't know what it's going to look like.
Maybe
But
some of these
or
older
could look
kids that are in Wittenberg or in CC
would love to come and help these other kids. You know?
Well, I'll tell you, I never learned more than when I started teaching. So, anyway, I don't want to take up any more of your time. Any other final questions or concerns, ideas for the survey, things you want us to make sure we include?
So one of the first questions is to find out how many people want to support admission to this education program.
That would definitely be part of it. That would definitely be part of it.
Yeah, you get the
survey.
commitment, and then the rest follows behind.
Okay. Well, thank you all for your attention today and for the good discussion. Our plan is within the next month to develop the survey, hopefully, and conduct that survey. And then the results of that survey will give us some direction as to where to go next. Okay? All right, let us pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you for the opportunity we've had to have this discussion over the last couple of months. We know that it is your desire that our children receive a good education and faithful catechesis. As we think about and discuss the ways that we might possibly provide that for the children of our church, we pray your ongoing blessing upon that conversation. And we simply ask that your will would be done. We ask now, as we depart from this place, having received the wonderful gifts of life and salvation and divine service, that you would grant us a quiet and peaceful rest of our day, rejoicing in the forgiveness of our sins, which is in Jesus Christ only. Amen.